My name is Don Marsh, and I'd like to share a critical look at PSE's Energize Eastside project. Energize Eastside is a proposal to upgrade an existing 115 kilovolt transmission line to 230 kilovolts. The line will run for some 18 miles through 5 Eastside cities: Redmond, Kirkland, Bellevue, Newcastle, and Renton. PSE will run 6 power wires plus 2 data cables on steel poles up to 130 feet high. We would like to show you a photo of what that would look like, but PSE says there are no poles in our area that are currently that tall. However, we can show you the scale of what PSE is proposing. Here are some 2-story houses, 2 very tall trees, and 2 people compared to a 130-foot pole. This may be a little hard to believe, so let's show a ruler. You can see that the poles and wires will extend far above the tree canopy, making this a prominent feature visible from miles around. This isn't your average transmission line. People living and working in downtown Bellevue will see Mount Rainier and the power line. It will affect all residents in our area, not just those living in the shadow of these huge poles. In order to build and operate the new high-voltage line, PSE will have to cut or destroy nearly 8,000 mature trees. Bellevue is trying to restore an urban tree canopy that has fallen below the coverage level recommended by the American Forests Organization, and this plan will be a huge setback for those efforts. CENSE is an all-volunteer group of hundreds of concerned citizens who oppose PSE's plan. We are the Coalition of Eastside Neighborhoods for Sensible Energy, and we believe that there are less expensive solutions to our energy needs that provide reliable electricity while protecting our neighborhoods and the environment. We oppose Energize Eastside because it's too big, it's too expensive, it's not necessary, and better options are available. We will explain each of these points in greater detail. In addition to being physically out of scale with residential neighborhoods and the overall landscape of the East Side, Energize Eastside is out of scale with our actual needs. A 230 kilovolt line can carry 4 to 5 times as much power as our current transmission line. Do we need that much capacity? Probably not for 100 years, and we'll show you why we think that a little later. Our next concern is cost. The upfront cost of Energize Eastside is approximately $200 million. This cost will be paid by PSE's customers in the form of higher electricity bills for the next 40 years. This isn't welcome news to anyone watching their budget, because PSE already charges the highest residential rates in the state compared to other providers serving at least 20,000 customers. When we factor in a generous rate of return on PSE's investment, the company's customers will pay about $500 million for Energize Eastside over the line's lifetime. For a community that is striving to meet the costs of its education, transportation, and health programs, we question the wisdom of investing $500 million in this project. Let's talk about whether we need this. CENSE volunteers have spent thousands of hours trying to understand the necessity of this project. We've studied PSE's planning documents, met with company representatives, interviewed industry experts, tracked energy trends, and we still can't justify PSE's forecast. Here is the demand forecast graph that PSE uses as the centerpiece of their campaign for the project. PSE's graph shows demand for electricity measured in megawatts steadily growing from 2012 through 2022. PSE shows 2 forecasts that assume different levels of conservation from their customers. The dashed line represents the capacity of PSE's system. We have a problem, PSE says, when rising customer demand exceeds system capacity, starting in 2016 or 2017. Most people are worried because they think this chart shows normal electricity consumption exceeding normal operating capacity, and the danger of power outages is imminent. PSE doesn't explain what this graph is actually showing. The first important point is that this is not normal system capacity. Normal system capacity is actually 1,600 megawatts. That would put the dashed line off the top of this slide. This line is showing what system capacity would be if 2 of the 4 transformers that serve the east side were offline. That's not just a rare event, it has never happened before. This is a graph of an extreme emergency. PSE has never mentioned this fact in any of their public presentations. The next point is that these demand trends are not normal everyday consumption. PSE is showing the highest electricity demand that happens during the coldest winter weekday, a situation that happens only a few hours each year. PSE's planning documents explain this, but PSE's public presentations skip that detail. What are the odds that half of PSE's transformers will break during the few hours we need them most? It's a situation that may never occur during our lifetimes. But even if it does, we won't automatically have a power outage. PSE's documents say that the system would become less flexible. Instead of a power outage, there would be an increased chance of an outage if some other catastrophe happens at the same time. We don't object to paying for increased electrical reliability, but this is a gold-plated standard that we don't think we can afford at a time when our resources are needed for other priorities. This graph is deceptive in other ways. For example, these data points from 2012 to 2014 are not actual measured values, but predictions from a forecast that is over 3 years old. We have strong evidence that they are too high. Once again, we fault the company for leading people to believe they are seeing actual historic values that establish a trend for future years. Finally, we are perplexed by PSE's projection of demand growing at an average rate of 1.7% per year. This is contrary to trends at the national, regional, and local level, all of which show electricity demand falling during the past decade. I'll show you a few of those graphs. This is a graph from the 10K form PSE files with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It shows PSE's energy deliveries for the last 7 years. During that time, there was an average decline of 0.9% per year. We thought this was a pretty compelling repudiation of PSE's customer demand chart, but company officials weren't swayed. That's for our whole system, they said. We admit that the overall trend is declining, but that's not what is happening on the east side. The east side is growing very fast, but that growth is masked by rapid declines elsewhere. To verify PSE's claim, we went searching for the signs of that robust east side growth. We found this graph on Bellevue's Environmental Stewardship website. The bars in this chart show electricity consumption for different sectors within Bellevue, with different colors for the years 2011 through 2014. The 2 most prominent sectors are the commercial sector on the left and residential on the right. We expected Bellevue to be one of the fastest growing centers of demand, but consumption is mostly flat except the commercial sector, where consumption has been falling at an impressive rate of 2.4% per year. This contradicts the notion that downtown businesses are driving huge increases in electricity consumption. Note the source of this data is PSE. We haven't found increasing use for either the whole system or for the largest city on the east side. But we know what PSE will say. It's not fair to look at annual consumption. Our graph shows peak demand, and that doesn't follow the same trends as annual consumption. We concede this is a fair point. In the past, consumption and peak demand trends have been highly correlated, but maybe something has changed. Since PSE refuses to release data on peak demand for the east side, we were stymied for a while. But then we found this graph. It shows PSE's peak load data for the past 3 decades. We are mainly interested in the past decade or so, when modern electrical efficiency and conservation started to have a significant effect on demand growth. Let's zoom in to those years. When we calculate a trend line for the last 10 years, we see growth of only 0.1% per year. But that includes several years during the recession, so let's take a longer view. If we go back 15 years, the rate is still under 1% per year. With this data, we are now prepared to argue that a 1% growth rate is more plausible than PSE's 1.7% projection. As we just saw, 1% is the upper limit of PSE's demand growth for the past 15 years. 1% is also the expected rate of population growth for the East Side during the next few decades. It's hard to imagine demand growth significantly exceeding the rate of population growth unless commercial sector usage is exploding. but we see no evidence of that in Bellevue's graph. 1% is the rate of growth predicted by Bellevue's last independent consultant, which authored the city's electrical reliability study. 1% is twice the rate of growth predicted by Seattle City Light. We see no evidence that the East Side is growing at more than twice the rate of Seattle. 1% is the rate of growth predicted by the U.S. Energy Information Administration for the nation as a whole. While it's true that the East Side is growing faster than the average American city, we are quicker to adopt new technology and conservation policies that moderate growth. So 1% is probably not too far from the mark. Let's see what a more reasonable forecast looks like. We correct PSE's predicted values for 2012 and 2013, which are too high, and use a 1% growth rate going forward. This shows that at the earliest, we have until 2022 before we cross PSE's artificial capacity line. But this is without taking any additional measures to avoid problems. We can do much better, as we will show shortly. There are better solutions to our energy needs. Let's find out what we can do to save our neighborhoods, our wallets, and the environment. Energize Eastside was designed from the start to address two problems: growth on the East Side and transmission of electricity to Canada, which is required by the Columbia River Treaty. PSE has purposely downplayed this regional aspect of the project, telling the Bellevue City Council that only 5 to 8% of the electricity on its line is headed for Canada. We wonder, is that 5 to 8% of normal system capacity or the emergency capacity PSE shows in their graph? This is an important detail that the company leaves vague. In any case, both the local and regional issues have other solutions that are better than Energize Eastside. For the local issue, PSE hired a contractor named E3 to study how much energy could be saved using alternatives to new poles and wires. E3 found 56 megawatts of cost-effective savings using a combination of electrical efficiency, distributed generation, and demand-side resources. 56 megawatts is about 8% of PSE's emergency system capacity, so it's a significant finding. The savings would reduce customer costs by $40 million compared to the status quo, and they would have an environmental benefit. CENSE talked to an industry expert who finds E3's report is not as thorough as it could be, and even more savings are possible if PSE were serious about this option. A better solution for Canadian electricity was studied by an industry consortium called Columbia Grid. For some years, Columbia Grid's preferred plan was to upgrade wires on an existing transmission line through the East Side owned by Seattle City Light. Since the poles could be left as they are, this project had an estimated cost of $16 million, less than a tenth the cost of Energize Eastside. And since PSE customers wouldn't have to pay most of the bill for this option, it would cost us next to nothing. By every conceivable measure, the wire upgrade is better than Energize Eastside for transmitting electricity to Canada. It has better transmission capacity, lower risk of energy traffic jams, it doesn't require new infrastructure to be built through our cities, and it's a bargain. There is no technical reason why this project can't be pursued other than corporate wheeling and dealing by PSE. If it were built, a large portion of the Canadian power flow that could theoretically cause stress on PSE's system will flow on other wires. CENSE estimates the reduction on PSE's line will be at least 35 megawatts, about 5% of emergency system capacity. Here is an updated forecast that shows what would happen if the solutions identified by E3 and Columbia Grid are pursued. PSE's current infrastructure would then be sufficient to meet our needs until at least 2038. We can monitor demand trends for the next 2 decades. If it looks like we might have an issue then, a variety of technology alternatives are likely to make poles and wires seem as quaint as a rotary telephone in a smartphone era. With such good options available, it's fair to wonder why PSE is pushing this project so vigorously. Well, they have the best motivation a private corporation can have: money. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will allow PSE to collect a rate of up to 10.3% on their investment. That's 10.3% on $200 million for 40 years. PSE also gets revenue from a firm contract to deliver 130 megawatts of electricity to Canada. Furthermore, the company was just approved to deliver electricity to the lucrative California energy market starting in October 2016. All of these revenue opportunities require PSE to have a 230 kilovolt line running north and south to deliver their product. PSE already has a 230 kilovolt line, but it leases the line from the Bonneville Power Administration. The lease expires in 2018, and we've heard that Bonneville might want that line back. If PSE is able to secure a new lease, it's going to cost the company considerably more than their current lease. However, if PSE can get its customers to buy a new line and collect big profits as well, that's pretty compelling for the company. PSE is aiming to complete Energize Eastside construction by 2018, but they can't afford for it to slip even by a few months, or they may have to give up contracts associated with that 230 kilovolt resource. Is it any wonder they seem desperate to push forward with this project, even when citizens ask for reasonable delays to get an independent assessment of the need? Now, if you're worried about what happens if PSE loses the lease on this 230 kilovolt line, don't be. The same electricity will flow to the east side, as well as California and Canada, no matter who controls the line. It's merely a question of who collects the tolls. I'd like to read you a quote from an article in the Wall Street Journal that came out the same year that Energize Eastside was announced. Quote, "Americans are using more gadgets, televisions, and air conditioners than ever before, but oddly, their electricity use is barely growing, posing a daunting challenge for the nation's utilities. Some companies are pouring money into high-voltage transmission lines, superhighways for electricity, because federal regulators are allowing them to collect above-average returns from customers." End quote. We think it's reasonable to ask if this might be happening in our case. If there's even a remote possibility that PSE is taking advantage of us, what can we do about it? CENSE tried to file a complaint with the state attorney general. He replied that this is really the jurisdiction of PSE's regulator, the Utilities and Transportation Commission. So we complained to them. The commissioners told us, the UTC does not substitute its judgment for the utilities management, but as a long-standing practice conducts after-the-fact review. In other words, the UTC will look at the project after it is built to determine whether it is reasonable to charge PSE's customers for it. Even if customers are relieved of that obligation, it will be small comfort for those who have to live with the results for decades. The UTC referred us back to the City of Bellevue, which is the lead permitting agency for the project. We have had numerous meetings and communications with the city, but so far we've seen few concrete results. Council members appear to be worried about the consequences of challenging a $9 billion company headquartered across the street from City Hall. Our conclusion is that we have to take this to citizens. Only citizens have the power to convince council members to oppose this project. The possibility of a political backlash is the only thing that worries politicians more than a potential lawsuit from PSE. With elections now half a year away, CENSE will look for candidates that support our goals. Each resident is an important part of this effort. Please visit our website at sense.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, donate to our cause, and find out about CENSE meetings. The website has links that make it easy for you to write a letter to your city council or newspaper. There's also a video of this presentation that you can share with friends and neighbors. Here is the choice for our future. On the left is a photo we found in Bellevue's Economic Development Plan. It's a nice picture because it shows the beauty of our residential neighborhoods, abundant trees, and a spectacular backdrop uninterrupted by ugly infrastructure. Contrast this with the photo on the right, which I took last summer on the interurban bike trail in Renton. Through diligent civic action and citizen involvement, we can preserve the beauty of Eastside cities for our children and grandchildren. On the other hand, if we sit back and let the bottom line of a private corporation dictate our future, our kids will see more scenes like I saw on the bike trail. We know this will be a difficult challenge, but CENSE is committed to pursuing every available legal and political avenue in order to achieve a better outcome for the East Side. We hope you'll join us.